Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of the Agenda. आप सभी का स्वागत है IYEA के एजेंडा के एक और एपिसोड पे. Today we will talk about the recent agricultural reforms from an economic and a legal standpoint. आज हम बात करेंगे किसान से रिलेटेड जो लेजिस्लेशन, जो कानून आए हैं, जो पार्लियामेंट लाया है, उनसे रिलेटेड आर्थिक और कानूनी जो प्रक्रिया रही है और जो उसका आर्थिक कॉन्सिक्वेंस या उसका असर होगा, उसके बारे में आज हम बात करेंगे. टू गो ओवर a brief structure of our discussion today, we will begin with discussing the legal aspects that obviously will flow from first the constitutional questions, that is the legislative competence of parliament. क्या पार्लियामेंट, क्या सांसद हमारा भारत का, क्या ये कानून ला सकता है? क्या स्टेट्स के पास ये पावर है? क्या सेंटर के पास ये पावर है? क्या क्लैश है वहां पर? उसके बारे में हम बात करेंगे. उसके बाद हम बात करेंगे एग्जीक्यूटिव लेजिस्लेचर के कॉन्टेक्स्ट में कि वहां पर क्या डिफरेंस आता है, एमएसपी कहाँ आता है, लीगल राइट्स क्या होते हैं. और लीगल डिस्कशन को आगे बढ़ाते हुए हम बात करेंगे प्राइस एश्योरेंस एक्ट की भी, और जो प्राइस इंश्योरेंस जो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट फार्मिंग से रिलेटेड एक्ट है, और उसी के साथ साथ फार्मर्स प्रोड्यूस ट्रेड एंड कॉमर्स एक्ट है, उसकी भी बात करेंगे. इनका क्या इफेक्ट है, कि क्या लीगल चेंजेस ये ला रहे हैं. उसके बाद हम बात करेंगे इकोनॉमिक एंगल्स की, कि अब तक क्या इकोनॉमिक सिचुएशन था, फार्मर्स डेट रिडन थे, क्या फार्मर्स के प्रॉब्लम्स थे, इनएफिशिएंसीज कहाँ कहाँ थी, करप्शन कहाँ कहाँ था. वो सारे एंगल्स हम पहले डिस्कस करेंगे. उसके बाद हम जाएंगे ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या होना चाहिए एग्रीकल्चरल पॉलिसी का, कब इंटरफेरेंस होना चाहिए, कैसे इंटरफेरेंस होना चाहिए, क्या इंटरफेरेंस होना चाहिए गवर्नमेंट की तरफ से, फार्मर्स के रिलेटेड जो मिथ्स हैं, कि कितने लोगों को एमएसपी का फायदा मिल रहा है, स्टेट्स कहाँ पर एमआईएस दे रही हैं, एपीएमसीज डिसमेंटल हो रहे हैं कि नहीं हो रहे हैं, फार्मर कहाँ सेल कर सकते हैं अपना प्रोड्यूस, कहाँ नहीं सेल कर सकते, प्राइस डिस्कवरी मैकेनिज्म क्या होता है, कि हम कैसे पता लगाएंगे कि प्राइस का जो प्रोड्यूस है उसका क्या वैल्यू होगा मार्केट के अंदर, एमएसपी का क्या रोल होगा, पेरिशेबल गुड्स का क्या कॉन्टेक्स्ट है, और फार्मर्स को क्या प्रोटेक्शन दी जाती है. उसके बाद हम बात करेंगे क्या पॉजिटिव्स और पॉसिबल नेगेटिव्स हैं मार्केट फोर्सेस को यहाँ अलाउ करने की, और किस हद तक पहले अलाउड था, नहीं था, इंसेंटिव्स क्या हैं, फार्मिंग को इकोनॉमिक एंटरप्राइज की तरह देखा जाना चाहिए कि नहीं देखा जाना चाहिए, स्केलिंग क्या होगी, लार्ज लैंड होल्डिंग्स की रिक्वायरमेंट है, लार्जर टेक्नोलॉजिकल इनोवेशंस की रिक्वायरमेंट है. उस सब की हम आज बात करेंगे. और उसके साथ साथ हम बात करेंगे कि लिमिट्स क्या रही हैं, यूनियन के पास भी लिमिट्स हैं इन टर्म्स ऑफ कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल लेजिस्लेटिव कॉम्पिटेंस, की पार्लियामेंट कुछ कर सकता है, स्टेट का लेजिस्लेचर कुछ कर सकता है, और उसके कॉन्टेक्स्ट में कि इस लेजिस्लेशन में क्या लिमिट्स हैं या क्या चीजें और बेहतर करी जा सकती हैं. ये नेसेसरी जरूर है बट सफिशिएंट है क्या, तो उसके बारे में बात करेंगे. और उसके बाद हम, अगर हमें टाइम मिलेगा तो हम आप सबसे क्वेश्चंस भी लेंगे. आप चाहें तो कमेंट बॉक्स में अपने प्रश्न छोड़ सकते हैं. और आज इस डिस्कशन के लिए मेरे साथ मौजूद हैं तीन मित्र, अगर मैं कह सकूं. तो हमारे गेस्ट्स, our guests for today, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mr. Kartikeya Batra, Mr. Sharan Banerjee, and Mr. Kan Mamge. Welcome everyone.
Thank you, Ajay.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you. Good evening to everyone who's watching from India, and good morning to everyone who's watching from anywhere else in the world.
Absolutely, that's an absolutely relevant point raised by
You're
Sharan.
missing the good afternoon zone, Sharan.
Oh, good afternoon as well to people who have missed out in different time zones.
Yes, so I think Kartik and Sharan have already pointed out that they're joining us from the United States. And just a brief background for our panelists today. I'll begin with Kartikeya. Kartikeya completed his bachelor's from Shahid Sukhdev College of Business Studies, followed by a master's from Tufts School, Fletcher School for Law and Diplomacy. And he's presently a PhD candidate at the University of Maryland in economics. Welcome, Kartikeya. He's
Thank
been
you so much.
associated with the Indian Youth Economic Association since 2012.
मैं तब से आपसे जुड़ा हुआ हूँ जब आप स्कूल में हुआ करते थे.
देखिए अभी हम उसके बारे में बात करें. So we have with us Sharan Banerjee, who too has been involved with the IYEA since 2014. He completed his initial training in economics from Presidency College in Kolkata, followed by Sciences Po in Paris, and is presently a PhD student at Cornell University. Welcome, Sharan. So, in applied economics.
Applied economics,
as
yes.
the specialist.
So that people don't get peeped out.
Yes, this is applied economics. And last but certainly not least, we have Mr. Karm Mamgen, who's completed his initial training in economics from Hindu College and has completed his LLB from the Faculty of Law, Delhi University, and is presently an associate at the Chambers of Senior Advocate, Mrs. Vibha Datta Makhija. Okay. Welcome, Karm.
Pleasure.
So our first point, as I've discussed for the audience, we would begin with the legal and the constitutional aspects first. And as we know, I think some legislative provisions that we will be discussing here today have been challenged at the Supreme Court already after the presidential notification. And but well, the economic policy and the consequences will not come to fruition if the acts are not established to be constitutional to begin with, right? So we will first begin with the legal or the constitutional discussion, and I'd like to get Karan on board with that, and then we'll move to the economic angles, right? हमारी audience के लिए हम पहले कानूनी विधि और संवैधानिक aspects को देखेंगे और उसके बाद हम आर्थिक policy की तरफ बढ़ेंगे. So Karan, let's begin with legislative competence here. If we have a plain reading of Schedule 7, the clash is between lists 2 and 3 and entries 14 and 33 respectively. Right?
Yeah.
There is
and 28 of list 2.
28 of list 2.
Yeah, which talks about markets and fair.
Okay, that's one argument that has also been brought forth. And to add to that, most certainly we have articles 246 and 254. Right, where we talk about repugnancy under the constitutional framework, where the union can pass a legislation where, let's say, the state has a legislation in place, either in list 2 or 3, and the union list would prevail. And obviously, there's the concept of pith and substance, where even if there is ancillary encroachment on another area, we have to look at the key aspects, and that's where entry 33 of list 3 comes in. Right.
Yeah.
So, Karan, your initial comments on this, on the legislative competence of Parliament, on pith and substance and repugnancy, if at all it's going to come into play, right? And ultimately, will it be upheld as having been passed within the legislative competence of the Union Parliament?
Yeah. So I'll first come to the pith and substance aspect, right? If you look at entry 33 of list 3 of the concurrent list, it says trade and commerce in and the production, supply and distribution of, and then it covers foodstuffs including edible seed oils, cattle fodder, raw cotton, jute, etc. Now if you look at the definition of the one of the acts, it defines it as the farmer's produce is defined with reference to the specific entries in entry 33. Right. So to the extent where you use pith and substance, it seems to be squarely covered under entry 33. That's perhaps why they defined farmers' produce in such a peculiar manner, so that they can, Insofar as now comes the question of encroachments, right? That's how, if in pith and substance, it's permissible under concurrent list, so the union is competent to enact the legislation, then minimal encroachments on your other two entries, 28 and 14, they wouldn't ipso facto invalidate this enactment. But secondly, even if there is direct repugnancy, that's when the provisions of 246 and 254 kick in, right? Especially
एक बात बोली थी कर्ण, अगर मेरे जैसे थोड़े से जो कम एजुकेटेड होता है उनके लिए आप समझा दे पिथन सब्सटेंस का मतलब क्या होता है?
Pithon substance means what is the crux of the enactment? What is the actual substance? Like, what is it all about? So the idea here is, if you're trying to legislate, and in Pithon substance, if it's essentially about something which falls in, say, the domain of the union, then it might include some minimum encroachment also on something the state can legislate with respect to.
तो आसान भाषा में बोलो, किसी भी कानून का जो एक मौलिक आधार है, फंडामेंटल बेसिस,
हाँ जी,
आप उसी की बात कर रहे हैं ना? हाँ, ठीक है.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
The very raison d'etre of the very law. So if we, and see this, of course, ये Supreme Court में ही argue होगा, and there would be people a lot more experienced than I am who would be arguing on this. The goal would be to show that this is, in essence, these two legislations, that they are in essence about agriculture. While for the government, the goal would be to say that it's under entry 33 of the concurrent list. Now, entry 33 is anyway a nightmare when you try to apply the Pithon substance doctrine, because of how widely it's been framed. And that is by design, of course, because you needed to have this entry in order to have the Essential Commodities Act to begin with. That's why it's inserted via amendment. It was not there in the original constitution. But I think, at least on the way that, also one other aspect we need to recognize, the government, the courts are generally reticent to interfere with these economic legislations. So as opposed to, say, if you have legislations about, say, service law or something, that's where courts can, be a lot more proactive. But when it comes to pure economic legislations, courts are more reticent about interfering in these sort of legislation. So anything related to fiscal matters, defense, foreign policy. So that's also something which is relevant here, the approach of the courts.
Okay, so so it's sort of fair to suggest that Pithon substance would apply. And would you wish to sort of comment on the 246 versus 254 debate here, that 5-judge bench judgment, I think of Justice Kapadia, that Kerala finance bill, which covers this?
So the gist of that judgment was, if there is an actual, and that's also, by the way, on just bare reading of our constitutional scheme, if there is an actual conflict. So of course we have federalism, and we like to give certain plenary legislative powers to the respective units, right? The union and the constituent states. But if there are direct conflicts, we do have a federal supremacy. And that is, again, you don't need a judgment to see that. This is inbuilt into our constitutional provisions. The idea really here, and I think maybe this aspect isn't talked about as much, is if you can harmonize the existing legal systems with these new acts, right? Because the first goal, even before you get into Pithon substance, is you try to harmonize them. Can you make both the present enactments workable and the new ones? And this has been settled law. I think Tika Ramji, that's 7-judge bench. Even federal courts for that 3 years after independence and before the constitutions. So the first attempt is always to harmonize. And I do think that in this case, you can actually harmonize them insofar as if you can retain the existing system. Yeah, so there's special, but see, the problem with special is also this entry is so widely. Can you hear me? Yeah. This entry is it is phrased in such a wide manner that you can't really say that it is an exception or a carve out from the general powers. But I think harmonize.
मैं कह रहा था, माफ कीजिएगा, ये जो आप हार्मोनाइजेशन की बात कर रहे हैं, मुझे याद आ रहा है 2012 का जो एक लॉ था, लॉ नहीं एग्जीक्यूटिव ऑर्डर था कि खुदरा व्यापार में हम बाहर से निवेश ला सकते हैं, एफडीआई मल्टी ब्रांड रिटेल जिसे बोलते हैं. उसमें उस समय की सरकार ने ये कहा था कि केंद्र में हम इसको लागू कर रहे हैं, पर राज्यों के पास ये ऑप्शन रहेगा कि वो लागू करते हैं या नहीं करते हैं। तो आप कुछ ऐसी बात कर रहे हैं इसमें, ये एक ठीक उदाहरण रहेगा?
No, not necessarily.
not entirely.
So when we जब मैं harmonization की बात कर रहा हूँ, my point is आप क्या ये system रख सकते हैं while ensuring जो existing laws है, the states can continue to apply that.
तो उनमें कोई अंतर्द्वंद ना हो आपस में?
There's not necessarily a contradiction. And we can get into this later, because I think one of the things which is now happening is notifying the entire state as an APMC.
Correct.
And there's nothing within these new enactments which prohibits that.
उसको नहीं रोकता,
right? That आप उसको समझ सकते हैं, वो एक overlap हो सकता था, and maybe this will also get tested in the courts. I don't know, but there's at least no express prohibition against this. So in that sense, I don't necessarily think it's something where you have to get into repugnancy. You can still harmonize the new laws with the existing system of state laws.
Okay, so while the legislation states that there will be an overriding effect, that overriding effect will only come into play when there is a difference which cannot be reconciled. So
Yeah.
it's the sort of last.
And this is just the last thing I want to say in this regard. The overriding effects with respect to the contract agreements bill, the price assurance bills,
Yes.
Usme the overriding effect is insofar as the individual farmers enter into an agreement with a buyer or a sponsor, right?
Yes.
So that their inter se agreement, it can override what laws would be applicable in the APMC. But as we just discussed, you can notify the APMC's area as large as you want. So even to that extent, there's no per se, encroachment as of now.
Okay. I think that will that's a good point to sort of move into the economic aspect, and we'll come to the specific parts of both legislations and the specific sections, the ones that we'd like to discuss as we move forward. तो अब हम बात करेंगे आर्थिक स्थिति की, पूरे देश की बात नहीं है, बट हम स्पेसिफिकली उन आर्थिक पॉइंट्स को उठाएंगे जिनकी वजह से सबसे पहले ये कानून लाए गए। तो मैं सबसे पहले कार्तिकेय जी को इस पे लाना चाहूँगा कि कार्तिकेय जी, हमने देखा है कि चलिए ये एक्ट्स आ रहे हैं, there is a positive, and I'm sure that there's a good chunk of people who are also pitching arguments against. कुछ लोग इसके फेवर में बोल रहे हैं, कुछ पक्ष में बोल रहे हैं, कुछ विपक्ष में बोल रहे हैं। मगर उससे पहले, वहां पर जाने से पहले, क्या हम बात कर सकते हैं उस इकोनॉमिक हार्म की? करप्शन हो गया, इनएफिशिएंसीज हो गई, फार्मर्स के डेट रिडन स्टेट हो गया, जो कर्जा है किसानों पर, गवर्नमेंट डिस्टॉर्शंस हो गए, ये सारी चीजें प्रोक्योरमेंट प्रोसेस की तरफ से हो गया, या फिर रिस्ट्रिक्शंस ऑन इंटरनेशनल ट्रेड की तरफ हो गया, या कुछ कमोडिटीज प्रोटेक्टेड हैं जिसमें एमएसपी मिलता है, और या हो गया कि ऑफ ट्रैक ट्रेड्स हो रही हैं कि एमएसपी का फायदा तो मिल रहा है मगर फार्मर के पास नहीं जा रहा है, वो लोकली इन्फ्लुएंशियल लोगों को बेच रहे हैं जो आगे बेटर प्राइसेस ले रहे हैं मार्केट। तो ये जो सिचुएशन है, पहले अगर इस पर आप कुछ अपनी टिप्पणी करना चाहेंगे कि अब तक का जो इकोनॉमिक हार्म रहा है, इसकी आवश्यकता क्यों है, और जो क्या सिचुएशन है एग्रीकल्चर का। और हमारे श्रोताओं के लिए जो पहले भी हमारे साथ जुड़ चुके हैं और जुड़ रहे हैं पिछले कुछ सालों से, कार्तिकेय जी और मेरी इस बात में इस विषय पे कई बार बात हो चुकी है। उनमें से एक सबके साथ कभी ना कभी, सब IYEA के पुराने मित्रगण हैं, मगर कार्तिकेय जी के साथ आई थिंक 2018 या 19
फरवरी
का फाइनेंस एक्ट,
जब इंटरिम बजट आया था, आई थिंक तब।
Yeah, the interim budget. Yes, the interim budget in 2009 after the elections.
हाँ, इलेक्शन से पहले, फरवरी की बात है।
Before the elections.
Oh, yes. Yes.
आपने जो ये मुद्दा उठाया है ना, ये एक लाइन का इसका जवाब नहीं है, ठीक है? इसके लिए आपको पूरा जो कृषि, हमारा जो एक पूरी जो कृषि अर्थव्यवस्था है, उसके बारे में आपको समझना पड़ेगा। हमारी कृषि अर्थव्यवस्था केवल एक अर्थव्यवस्था नहीं है, उसका एक स्ट्रेटेजिक एंगल भी है, जो कि है फूड सिक्योरिटी। सरकार कृषि के अर्थव्यवस्था में इतनी घुसी हुई है कि आप अगर आज की डेट में आप देखिए, जो आपका टेलीकॉम सेक्टर है, आप जाके मोबाइल फोन खरीदते हैं, आप एक सिम कार्ड लेते हैं, उस सिम कार्ड की जो दरें होती हैं वो कंपनी तय करती है किस आधार पर कि और कंपनियां किस दर पर उसको ऑफर कर रही हैं और उनकी अपनी लागत कितनी है। ठीक बात है। लेकिन कृषि अर्थव्यवस्था में ये इतना आसान नहीं है। कृषि अर्थव्यवस्था में आपके पास देखिए एमएसपी है, एमएसपी में आपने बोला कि 20-25 क्रॉप्स लिस्टेड हैं। अब उसकी सच्चाई ये है कि केवल उसमें जो एमएसपी मिलता है वो कुछ ही राज्यों में एक्चुअल में रियलाइज होता है, और उसमें भी केवल 2 से 3 क्रॉप, मोस्टली चावल और गेहूं पे आपको एमएसपी का रियलाइजेशन होता है। ठीक है, तो इससे आपने क्या किया, आपका पंजाब का जो किसान है वो बेमतलब तो मैं नहीं बोलूंगा, वो चावल उगा रहा है। और चावल एक ऐसा क्रॉप है, जो देखिए मैं कोई कृषि विशेषज्ञ तो नहीं हूँ, लेकिन इतना मुझे पता है, जब मैं बड़ा हो रहा था मुझे पढ़ाया गया था कि चावल बिहार बंगाल में उगता है क्योंकि वहां बारिश ज्यादा होती है। तो पंजाब तो गैंगेटिक प्लेन का पार्ट है, तो पंजाब में चावल क्यों उग रहा है? पंजाब में चावल इसलिए उग रहा है, 2-3 कारण है पंजाब में चावल। और मैं आपको एक उदाहरण दे रहा हूं कि किस हद तक अर्थव्यवस्था में इतने सारे, जिसे कहते हैं हम, फ्रिक्शंस हैं या डिस्टॉर्शंस है, जिसे हम इकोनॉमिक्स में बोलते हैं। पंजाब का किसान चावल इसलिए उगा रहा है क्योंकि उसको अच्छा दाम मिल जाता है एमएसपी के माध्यम से। पंजाब का जो एपीएमसी का जो पूरा ढांचा है वो काफी अच्छा काम करता है। वहां पर आपको बिजली मुफ्त मिलती है अगर आप किसान है तो आप पानी नीचे से पंप कर सकते हैं जितना आप चाहें। बारिश तो वहां इतनी होती नहीं है तो नीचे से ही पानी निकालेंगे। ठीक है, आप चावल उगाते हैं और उसके बाद क्या होता है, आप दिल्ली में बैठे हैं, अभी अक्टूबर का महीना आ गया है, आपके हेपा फिल्टर आ गए होंगे बाहर हवा को साफ करने के लिए। क्यों? क्योंकि इस मंथ के अंत में पराली जलेगी। पराली क्यों जलेगी? क्योंकि वो पराली चावल से निकलती है। ठीक है, ये एक उदाहरण मैं आपको ये दे रहा हूं कि ये एक पूरी ये कड़ियां हैं। ये एक केवल एक मुद्दा नहीं है, इसमें पूरी कड़ियां हैं। आपकी जो पूरी कृषि अर्थव्यवस्था है वो इस तरीके से अब इस समय ऑर्गेनाइज्ड है कि हर कदम पर उसमें कहीं ना कहीं एक डिस्टॉर्शन है। एक और मैं आपको उदाहरण देता हूं। ये जो हम बात कर रहे हैं कि आप जो कह रहे हैं कि ये जो इन्फ्लुएंशियल प्राइवेट ट्रेडर है, इसको जाकर किसान अपना सामान बेचते हैं, वो मंडी नहीं जा पाता, उसका कारण क्या है? उसका कारण, एक बहुत बड़ा कारण ये है कि ये जो इन्फ्लुएंशियल ट्रेडर है ये किसान को उस समय कर्ज देता है जब किसान अपने जो फसल का जो सीजन शुरू हो रहा होता है तब बीज खरीद रहा होता है, अपना फर्टिलाइजर खरीद रहा होता है, खाद खरीद रहा होता है। क्यों? क्योंकि फॉर्मल फाइनेंसिंग अभी भी फार्मर्स के लिए अवेलेबल नहीं है। अभी मेरे को जितना मेरा आखिरी आंकड़ा था कि 40% या एक मोटा मोटा आंकड़ा पकड़ लीजिए कि मेजॉरिटी फार्मर्स अभी भी इनफॉर्मल फाइनेंस पर निर्भर हैं। और वो फाइनेंस उनको कहां से मिलता है? उन्हीं लोगों से मिलता है जिनको बाद में जाके वो अपनी फसल बेचते हैं। और वो लोग जो आप कह रहे हैं वही लोग जाके मंडी में उसका बहुत ऊंचा दाम ले लेते हैं। इसका कारण क्या है? हमारा बैंकिंग सेक्टर अभी भी ग्रामीण क्षेत्रों में इतना परिपक्व नहीं हुआ है। तो आपके सवाल का मैं जवाब शुरू कहां करूं और अंत कहां करूं मुझे नहीं पता, इसीलिए मैंने एक छोटा शॉर्टकट अपनाया है। मैंने आपको 2 उदाहरण दे दिए हैं कि जो आप, जिसको आप बड़ा एक मुद्दा, इतना आप केवल उसका आउटकम देख रहे हैं कि ऐसा क्यों हो रहा है। उसके इनपुट्स और द प्रोसेस इन इटसेल्फ इज सो कॉम्प्लिकेटेड एंड देयर आर सो मेनी स्टेक होल्डर्स दैट इट्स इम्पॉसिबल टू पिनपॉइंट वेयर द प्रॉब्लम ओरिजिनेट्स एंड वेयर इट एंड्स. And we can talk in more specific detail about specific issues, but to just larger macro question, this is my answer.
Okay. So that's a good start, at least not in the sense of what the economic angles all are, but there is a lot more to the problem than mere economics, right? I will get in Sharan first, and Kartiki ji, फिर हम आपके पास वापस आएंगे. Sharan, let's sort of get to, before we get into, okay, there's a multitude of problems as far as and one thing which is sort of common across the world is protection to farmers is pretty much a given. हम ऐसा कोई नहीं कह रहे हैं कि भाई सरकार फार्मर्स को प्रोटेक्शन नहीं देगी, वो हर देश में होता है, बिकॉज हमारा पर्पस सिर्फ इकोनॉमिक एंटरप्राइज करना नहीं है, हालांकि वो भी है मगर सिर्फ वो नहीं है, जैसे कि कार्तिकी जी ने और कर्ण ने भी कहा पहले. तो लेट्स बिगिन विद दीज 2 एस्पेक्ट्स, अगर इस पर आप कुछ अपनी टिप्पणी देना चाहेंगे. कि सरकार जब इंटरफेयर करती है तो व्हाई, हाउ, फॉर व्हाट पर्पस, कहाँ पर सरकार का इंटरवेंशन आना जरूरी है, कहाँ अभी आ रहा है, राइट, और इसके अराउंड सरकार की क्या रोल होनी चाहिए, क्या अभी रोल है उस इकोनॉमिक प्रोसेस, जो केवल इकोनॉमिक प्रोसेस नहीं है मगर उसमें इंटरफेयर या इंटरवीन करना।
तो शरण, इससे पहले आप कुछ बोले, अजय सॉरी, मैं एक बात बोलना चाहूंगा कि मैं कंप्लीटली सरकार के इंटरवेंशन के खिलाफ नहीं हूँ, और मैं इसके बारे में और बताऊंगा आपको, अगर आपको मेरे वक्तव्य से ऐसा लगा तो ये नहीं है सही।
नहीं,
पर मैं आपको कुछ उदाहरण दे रहा हूँ। हाँ ठीक है, सॉरी शरण, सॉरी।
बिल्कुल। अगेन फॉर आवर ऑडियंस, हमारे श्रोताओं के लिए दो चीजें, हम ये नहीं कह रहे हैं कि सरकार इंटरफेयर ना करे, और ये कार्तिकी जी ने भी नहीं कहा है, आई एम जस्ट बिल्डिंग ऑन the base that he set up, that there are multitude of problems, right, and we can get into the details of it, right, like he said, and like I mentioned, there's a multitude of problems, but now we have to look at what point what is to be the objective of state interference, कि सरकार जहां पर इंटरफेयर कर रही है, क्यों कर रही है, क्या आउटकम के लिए कर रही है, उसका ऑब्जेक्टिव क्या है और कैसे कर रही है इंटरफेयर। उसके साथ साथ जो दूसरा पॉइंट है, शरण अगर आप चाहें तो आप उस पर भी आ सकते हैं, कि हम उस पर आएंगे कि कहीं ना कहीं फार्मिंग को इंटरफेरेंस है, वो दुनिया भर में है, और प्रोटेक्शन फार्मर्स को दी जानी चाहिए, बट उसके साथ साथ फार्मिंग को एक इकोनॉमिक एंटरप्राइज की तरह, एक इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी की तरह भी देखना जरूरी है, उसको आत्मनिर्भर बनाने के लिए। किसान की आत्मनिर्भरता इस चीज पर भी डिपेंडेंट है कि वो किस प्रकार से इकोनॉमिक ट्रांजैक्शन में इंडिपेंडेंटली इंडल्ज कर सकते हैं, राइट, and please sort of, again, these are two different aspects, and
I'll address them both. So
please,
firstly, I don't think government intervention needs to be a taboo, because we're a developing country. At the end of the day, we might be the 5th largest economy in the world, or the 3rd largest in purchasing power parity, but at the end of the day, we're still a developing country. Government intervention always does not need to be a taboo. You look at social democracies in the West, you have very, very successful models of government intervention in healthcare, in banking, and a lot of these other cases, right? So government intervention per se, and I'll sort of just reiterate what Kartik has said, does not necessarily be a problem. The problem comes in when government intervention starts creating distortions at every level. Now, the problem with Indian agriculture is much more structural over the past 70 years than in a lot of ways what this bill tries to achieve. Now, what we need to keep in mind is that this bill is not a magic pill. It's not going to solve all the problems or all the underlying issues with regards to Indian agriculture overnight. It addresses some aspects of Indian agriculture, but not all. So, for instance, if we look at the contribution of agriculture to GDP, it has been dropping because India is developing, and one of the basic tenets of development is that once you start moving from an agricultural to a manufacturing or a service-based economy, you have more and more contribution from manufacturing and services as opposed to agriculture. The problem with India, however, is that even though agriculture contributes far less to the GDP in terms every year, if you look at percentage figures, it is soaking up much more of the employment in India at this point of time. So for instance, if we're talking about farming, for instance, we're talking about contract farming, this bill does not address almost 50% of the labor force in agriculture, because the 50% of the labor force in agriculture is seasonal. They are migrant laborers. So they move from one place to another, rural spaces to urban spaces, depending on seasons, to cultivate crops. In a lot of cases, they don't have lands of their own and they work on other pieces of land. So it's not as if that every farmer or every farming unit in India is owned by one family or by one farmer per se, right? We have multiple people who are moving between towns and cities who are trying to work and earn days' meat, right? Depending on the cultivation season. The problem over here is the fact that these people today, at this point of time, to contextualize what has happened in COVID with the massive impact on the farming sector, with the massive impact on the economy shutting down, there is a mass chunk of migrant laborers who are now moving back into the villages, who are now going to look to substitute whatever employment opportunities that they had in the cities through agricultural activities. What they are now going to start doing with the guarantees of MSPs and all of that that is there with the government is that they're going to start producing more. They're going to start producing more crops. So once you have this problem of an oversupply in the system over the next 6 to 1 year, there is a massive deflation that is going to take place in the Indian agricultural system with the prices that are going to have. And this deflation is not just going to come from oversupply. This deflation is also going to come from the existing problems that are there in the APMCs that we're talking about. For instance, the farmer not receiving enough money from the sale of the crops. Where does the sale happen? Does the ultimate point of sale happen when the farmer sells it to a trader in the APMC and then the trader directly goes and sells it to a private entity? No, it doesn't. There are multiple aggregators in the process. So there are multiple leakages that happen on the way from the farm to the table. What this bill tries to do over here is address this exact leakage in whatever ways possible. And it's not a magic correct. It's not this magic correct idea that it's going to remove all distortions. What it tries to do is say that, okay, now we have corporates now, and corporates can be a very, very sweeping classification. We not only have big corporates like Reliance or Adani who might come into the agricultural sector, we also have a lot of these smaller players, startups, for instance, who have been engaged in contract farming, which frees up a lot of the regulatory bottlenecks for them to start approaching farmers on their own. And through this act, tries to match the farmer to these startups and these corporates at various capacities, in the form of contract farming, outside contract farming, in various capacities, to create an ecosystem where there is not just price discovery through auctioning and a parallel APMC, through a parallel MSP and APMC, a parallel market structure, but also directly between, say, a small startup. It's not always going to be Reliance. It's impossible to think that Reliance is going to go into every farm in the country. It's not possible, right? So we for every Reliance, we will have informal networks. We will have all these informal buyers and sellers and distribution systems, right? So the problem of Reliance in a lot of ways can also be aggregation. Where is Reliance buying? I'll just finish off. So the problem of Reliance can be at multiple places in the system. And the only other point that I want to talk about is the fact that for the reason why we need an MSP system, and we can get into the nitty-gritties of the MSP system, is that we've seen that, for instance, in India, the Manrega system has been a very, very successful barometer in a lot of cases to create a minimum wage idea, a marker in a lot of cases, that there is a minimum wage that is being offered by the government through Manrega. The MSP system in this case can be a very parallel, important indicator as to, okay, this is the price that is out there. If the system is implemented correctly, we can go about and have a system where farmers in a lot of cases now, say if 10% of the farmers were receiving the benefits and spillovers of MSP, it can rise to 12 or 13%. The point is, I don't think any government, or I don't think any institution in this country would be right in arguing that we are going to increase this benefit from 10% of the farmers to 90% of the farmers overnight. But we need to understand that it has to be a sustained process from, say, 10% to 15% or 20%. So if it's a reform-based initiative that we're talking about, yes, it's going to take a while. But agriculture, at the same point of time, as Karthikeya spoke about, there are multiple other frictions in the agricultural chain which make Indian agriculture extremely insulated from the markets and extremely uncompetitive on the international scale, which need to be addressed before we can actually make a lot of these farmers in the economy friendlier towards the market. But I know that I didn't address the lives versus livelihood sort of question yet, but we'll get on to that. We will get on to that at some point.
इसमें दो तीन मुद्दों पे बात करना चाहूंगा जब शरण ने बोला। हाँ, इसमें दो तीन मुद्दे जो मैं बोल, हाँ जी,
बिफोर आई गेट यू इन, पहले आप इस पॉइंट के बाद अगर आप उसके अंत में अगर एक और प्रश्न का जवाब दें, ठीक
जी,
है, बहुत छोटे फार्मर्स आएंगे, सही बात है, ठीक है, थोड़ा कंसोलिडेशन होगा, प्राइस बेटर देंगे लार्जर कंपनीज जिनके पास पेइंग कैपेसिटी है, तो वो मार्केट शेयर अपना बढ़ाएंगे, चलिए ठीक है। मैं कह रहा हूं अगर अदानी एंटरप्राइज, रिलायंस इंडस्ट्रीज, बड़े फर्म्स अगर आते भी हैं, उनका डायरेक्ट कांटेक्ट हो रहा है फार्मर से और फार्मर की एजेंसी बढ़ रही है उसमें, तो उसमें भी क्या बुराई है? क्या हम ये चाहते हैं
मैं वो मेरे जो मैं शरण को बोलने वाला
हो?
था, जो मैं शरण को बोलने वाला था उसका उसी में आपका जवाब भी है।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल, प्लीज।
तो इसके दो मुद्दे हैं। पहले मैं वो मनरेगा का मुद्दा उठाऊंगा जो शरण ने बोला कि मनरेगा में एक जो न्यूनतम दिहाड़ी मिलती है उससे एक मार्कर सेट हो जाता है उस इलाके में, और उस हिसाब से जो बाकी दिहाड़ियां हैं वो तय होती है। मैं बिल्कुल इस बात को मानता हूं। हालांकि मनरेगा का भी जो न्यूनतम दर है, जो आपको पता होना चाहिए, ये कई राज्यों में उस राज्य के जो नोटिफाइड न्यूनतम दिहाड़ी है उससे भी कम है। कि मान लीजिए अगर बिहार में मिनिमम वेज नोटिफाइड 200 रुपए है तो वहां का मनरेगा वेज केवल 150 रुपए है। ये अपने आप में एक कानूनी अंतर्द्वंद है बहुत राज्यों में, पहली बात। तो ये बात बिल्कुल सही है, लेकिन मनरेगा का ढांचा इस ढांचे से बहुत अलग है। क्यों? देखिए, अभी हम ये बात कर चुके हैं कि एमएसपी का जो एक्सेस है वो मोटा मोटी 3-4 बड़े राज्यों में सबसे ज्यादा देखा जाता है। 10% से कम किसान एमएसपी पे अपनी अपनी पैदावार बेचते हैं। मैं नहीं जानता कि ऐसे स्ट्रक्चर में प्राइस डिस्कवरी कैसे हो रही है इन एरियाज में। जो बाकी 90% किसान है उनकी प्राइस डिस्कवरी कैसे हो रही है। मेरे अनुसार वो 90% जो किसान है वो एमएसपी का इतना लाभ ना डायरेक्टली उठा पा रहे हैं ना इनडायरेक्टली उठा पा रहे हैं, क्योंकि वहां पर जो मंडी, देखिए अगर एक सिस्टम एग्जिस्ट ही नहीं करेगा तो केवल ये कहना कि वो सिस्टम अगर होता तो आपकी न्यूनतम दर इतनी होती तो आज उस अनुसार आप मुझे उतना न्यूनतम दर दीजिए, ऐसे नहीं होता। ये आपके पास सही में वो विकल्प होना चाहिए, तभी आपकी जो बार्गेनिंग पावर है वो बढ़ती है। मनरेगा का उदाहरण इसलिए अलग है क्योंकि मनरेगा में इतना सोशल एक्टिविज्म है कि अगर आपको आपके पैसे नहीं मिले टाइम से तो उसको लेके आप आरटीआई तक फाइल कर सकते हैं। मनरेगा एक सरकारी स्कीम है और उसके अंतर्गत आपको ये हक है, इट्स अ राइट्स बेस्ड स्कीम। यू हैव द राइट टू वर्क फॉर 100 days इन अ ईयर।
सो वो सेम चीज तो यहाँ पर भी आ रही है।
यहाँ पे आपको लेकिन मनरेगा की जो रीच है, जो पहुंच है, वो ग्राम पंचायत लेवल तक है। आप जाके मनरेगा वेबसाइट खोलिए और चेक करिए कि कल किस जीपी में कितने दिन का डिमांड है, आपको वो डेटा मिल जाएगा।
Sure.
Again, I see. You can't. Yeah, you can't take minimum wages. Yeah. See, the point is, I was.
Let's get back to the focus point here.
हाँ, दूसरा मुद्दा जो शरण ने उठाया कि रिलायंस और ये बड़े कॉर्पोरेशंस आएंगे, और आपने भी जो बोला कि अगर वो किसानों से खुद डील कर रहे हैं तो इसमें बुराई क्या है। अब ये बात समझिए,
फार्मर की एजेंसी बढ़ रही है।
फार्मर की एजेंसी कैसे बढ़ेगी अजय? 80% फार्मर आपका स्मॉल और मार्जिनल लैंड होल्डर है। 80% जब आपका फार्मर स्मॉल और मार्जिनल लैंड होल्डर है, जो कॉर्पोरेशन है वो 80% के पास जाएगा या 20% के पास जाएगा जिसके पास बड़े फार्म्स हैं। बिहार में ये हुआ है। बिहार में एपीएमसी एक्ट 2006 में हटा दिया गया था, और मैं कल एक रिपोर्ट पढ़ रहा था उसमें ये बोला गया है कि बिहार में एपीएमसी एक्ट हटने के बाद जितना भी ट्रेड हुआ है, जितना भी व्यापार हुआ है कॉर्पोरेट्स और किसानों के बीच, उसमें सबसे मोटा फायदा बड़े किसानों को गया है। आपकी बात थियोरी में अच्छी है, शरण की बात भी थियोरी में अच्छी है, लेकिन ऐसा होता नहीं है। कारण वो शरण ने भी बोला, वही बात बोली कि एक सिस्टम में अगर 15 लीकेजेस है ना, आप उसमें से 2 लीकेजेस प्लग कर देंगे तो पता है क्या होगा? जो बाकी 13 लीकेजेस है उससे ज्यादा पानी और तेज निकलना शुरू हो जाएगा। और उससे क्या होता है, जब भी हम मार्केट को फ्री करते हैं तो वी हैव अ कॉन्सेप्ट कॉल्ड विनर्स एंड लूजर्स। In the presence of distortions, when you have markets getting freed up, it is actually possible that the losers might be more than the winners and they might lose even more.
No,
again, I am not against.
We're not disagreeing with whatever you're saying.
I'm not against the act per se, the intent of the act. I am just saying, unless you fix the structural issues that Sharan also alluded to, this is like, मतलब मैं इसको लोकली इसको बोलूं ना, ये कैंसर पे बैंडेड लगाने वाली बात है।
नहीं, this is okay.
क्योंकि नहीं, मैं क्यों बोल रहा हूँ? नहीं, why is not an analogy? Because the larger structural issue, देखिए मैं खुद एपीएमसी एक्ट हटाने के फेवर में हूँ, लेकिन केवल एपीएमसी एक्ट हटाने के फेवर में नहीं हूँ। उसके साथ साथ आपको मौलिक बदलाव लाने पड़ेंगे अपने कृषि अर्थव्यवस्था में।
That's exactly what I think there needs to be a consensus on that. For instance, even in 1991, for instance, if you look at noted agricultural economist Ashok Gulati, he calls these bills to be the 1991 moment for Indian agriculture, and there's a reason for that. The reason is automatic entry routes for foreign firms or foreign investments into India themselves were not the magic solution to a lot of problems in manufacturing. We have to look at the fact that there was complementary to very, very important things that happened in 91. There was delicensing of Indian manufacturing. And the second was there was de-reservation for small scale units. So there were two very important institutional components along with the additional investments that were coming in, right? The problem over here is the fact that if we're talking about the bargaining power of farmers, and I'll just clarify what Kartikeya was about to say. There can be cases where Reliance can approach 10 different farmers simultaneously with a slew of corporate lawyers and try to sign them on with contracts or agreements, whatever the legal terminology is, at terms which can be very, very disadvantageous for them.
Okay.
But in the same case, and I'll just finish, in the same case, there are also smaller startups who are going to go in and also try and giving much better terms than what a Reliance might give. And that might be with a more one-to-one interaction between the owner of the startup or or individuals who are higher up in the startup hierarchy or the firm hierarchy and the farmers. So there are two possible cases that might exist over here, which this bill opens up to.
Okay.
And we need to be cognizant of both those two aspects that might happen simultaneously in a lot of states.
Okay, so I'm going to get in Kern now. अब मैं मंगेन जी को लाना चाहूँगा, both economic and legal angles. But before I get you in, Kern, okay, I'm going to give my sort of response to what Kartik and Sharan are saying. Right, my opinion still remains, and I would like you to shed light upon the statutory provisions here as well, right, for the contract farming as well as in the produce. So contract farming, I mean the Price Assurance Act. And for the other act, which is the Farmers Produce Trade and Commerce Act. Right? I'm not going into the entire name here. Right? Both provisions, we look at section 8 to 11, and as well as sort of sections 4, 6, 7, and 14 for the Farmers Produce Act. But before we get into that, a couple of pointers. My assessment from our earlier discussion and from just now what Kartik and Karan said is that one, this is a reality that farmers are not getting 90%. This is a Niti Aayog report, I think 2016 or 17.
Shanta Kumar Committee.
Okay. So 90% not receiving the benefit, right? And they have to sell on the side to someone who has that influence, who's able to. Sure, that person is the money lender. Sure.
So let me correct that. More than 50, around 50, more than a little over 50, depending on the crop that you're looking at, 50 to 70% of it is sold to, say, people are selling to private traders, but there is also other parallel structures apart from the mandi, like say cooperatives.
Sure.
So there is also that component.
Sure, I'm not denying that.
No, I'm saying the majority of the sort of exploitation, if you were to put it that way, happens, I think, yeah.
So my 3 points here is, Karan, and I'd like you to come in on the economics and the law of it. One is that there is statutory provision which sort of protects the farmers in terms of the contract. And I think my assessment is that it's tilted towards the farmers significantly in this case. And even if there is an unconscionable bargain that is taking place, the Indian contract as is sufficient to sort of override such an agreement, and like it wouldn't be an enforceable contract.
Also, the SDM can take suo motu cognizance.
Yes, so there is a dispute.
Because you'd have to register each individual contract on their portal, each agreement on that. So they can suo motu get into your agreement.
Yeah, no, I want you to come in on all of this together. I just want the other two aspects covered as well. Second is that I believe the Act, I think Section 7 of the Produce Act says that the government will come up with this price mechanism and information system. Right? So maybe you could shed some light upon that, which sort of removes information asymmetry. Right? And at the same time, just as you said, there are cooperatives. I'm sure there is a good pool of great legal aid, legal clinic setups which can look at sort of the legal work in terms of contract drafting for farmers. Sure, there has to be some effort on the part of the farmers there, but there is a significant increase in the agency of the farmer, right? There is a possibility that they might end up getting, or a good chunk might end up getting now the MSP price, which, a clarification for our viewers in case this is a point of contention, the MSP is an executive act. Right? It's something that is a procurement price determined by the cabinet, or specifically the Cabinet Committee on Economic Affairs. So legislature can go out of its way to sort of stop it. Well, honestly, I don't think that's going to happen. But in none of these acts has MSP been done away with, right? In terms of the relationship between
Not yet. Not yet.
No, I think, again, I'm going to get to that specific part, and I want Karan to come in on this. The
Just
Sahib Ram
before-
Kapoor judgment of the executive versus the legislature and the buckle, right? That was in the context of textbooks, but perhaps you could shed some light on that as well.
I think just before Karan intervenes, I think there's a very important point Ajay raised over here about information asymmetry. And if you look at the trends in Indian agriculture over the past 5-6 years, you see that there is this massive wave of digitization that's happening in Indian agriculture, and you're seeing a lot of.
Exactly.
So this is a very important point. This idea that is coming in from a lot of sides, and it might exist in a few sections of the farming community, depending on a lot of entitlements and a lot of other societal factors that come in. The fact that while farming, and this is very important for even the viewers to note, the farmer is not in the dark today about what prices can exist with digitization. And a lot of these initiatives, like I think there's this startup called Crop India, where there is a lot of work that is going on in live transmission of crop prices or prevailing crop prices, not just in India, but also the international levels. What are the prices that are prevailing for a lot of these crops that might be seeping into the farmers? And this information asymmetry might not just exist. And again, I can see Kartikeya laughing, but it can happen in a lot of cases, right? So this information asymmetry can be solved, has been addressed in a lot of ways for a lot of farmers with digitization.
Yes, absolutely.
So now I'll allow Karan to like sort of
So Karan, I'm just going to go over the points once again, right? Protection of farmers, we look at sections 8 to 11 in terms of dispute resolution. We look at sections 4, 6, 7, 14 of the Produce Act, right? And then again, ultimately, the fact that the farmer has the agency, the freedom to get into a contract by himself, because if the government is going to be controlled, or let's say that middleman outside of the system has more of a say at the mandi than the farmer does, I'm sure the Reliance and other companies, small or large, right? I'm not going to make a sort of blanket distinction here. I think that's a better move, hands down, right? Sure, we can look at consolidation, larger, smaller firms. Perhaps Karthik is not going to agree with me, but अब मैं ममगेन जी को इस पर लाना चाहूंगा लॉ और इकोनॉमिक्स पे कि लीगल प्रोटेक्शंस क्या हैं, और फ्रॉम एन इकोनॉमिक एंगल एजेंसी आ रही है फार्मर के हाथ में, क्या बुराई है?
So I probably fall somewhere between where you stand on this and where Kartikeya is. So I could see him smiling and at specific places. And can't you hear me?
Yourself, I think there's some issue.
Yeah, I say my perspective is somewhere in the middle of where what let's say your opinion would be here and what I think Kartikeya would be saying. First thing, contract fairness, right? There are certain safeguards against that. There legislative safeguards. The agreements cannot be in contravention of the given of these. Like you can't remove these safeguards from an agreement. That agreement would not be enforceable. On the other hand, I don't think things like legal aid clinic, you don't want your agricultural policy to sort of, you need a more robust system of ensuring good agreements than like bunch of like bunch of volunteers getting together working for a cheap price and then saying we'll go to like a gaon and then
who can sort of go out of their way to draft for farmers, or sort of a collective pool of farmers in terms of standardization.
I'm just saying, if you're trying to effect a policy which broadly half a adult population is employed in, you want a more sort of robust system of ensuring the contracts, which you can stipulate. Like, obviously the act has certain safeguards, and you actually need a separate ecosystem around ensuring that abuse does not happen. But I don't think that safeguard can only exist in form of voluntary services from like bunch of people willing to go out in the villages. Second aspect is on
collective sort of forming of farmers or producers organizations of the like. That's something that
so that's what I was getting to right now. See, according to Shanta Kumar committee, and this is where, so this argument actually cuts both ways, right? Like, I don't think this is going to be all this like huge panacea which will solve all the problems. And for that same very reason, it can't also be bedlam. Like, it's not going to lead to a doomsday scenario for the same reason. If 90-ish% of your people are not relying on these MSPs, then in effect, this is not affecting that many people to begin with, right? Which is, I think, the weaker case for this. Like, what is the specific, like, I completely agree with Karthikeya when he said, when you introduce market freedom, there are going to be winners and losers. One way to assess, like, there are different ways you can optimize, like, there are different utility models, right? You can look at Pareto improvements, Kaldor-Hicksian models, like a lot of the trade models. Is there dead weight loss or surplus? Let's forget all those things right now. But even if, let's say in your Bihar example, if it exclusively benefits the larger farmer, does that also cause some harm to the smaller farmer? That is one aspect, right? Like, in that case, it's if it's a no-win situation, but no loss either, and there's one class of people benefiting from it, that would still make it a net positive.
छोटे किसानों के लिए आपने मंडी बंद कर दी ना, ये नुकसान है छोटे
नहीं, मंडी बंद, so that is the aspect.
मंडी बिहार में बंद है, APMC was removed.
हाँ, तो बट ये वाले लॉस तो नहीं कर रहे ना.
मैं कर्ण को जवाब दे रहा हूँ कि, और उसमें भी मैं आऊंगा, मुझे आप ये दोनों खत्म करें, मैं अच्छे से वक्तव्य दूंगा कि
like, absolutely. So we can independently criticize the Bihar government's decision to shut down the mandi without necessarily, because this law does not stipulate for shutting down the mandis.
De jure it doesn't.
Like, like you could plausibly make an argument that this paves the path for that to happen.
Don't steal my thunder. That's my point.
Don't
steal my thunder.
My bad. I won't.
But I must say, अजय, तुम्हारे शो पे आने के लिए बहुत पढ़ाई करके आनी पड़ेगी. तुम्हारे वकील भी इकोनॉमिक्स की भाषा बोलते हैं.
That's because I studied economics.
A lawyer who hasn't studied economics is bound to become a public enemy. I'm making this as a positive remark in that sense. Absolutely, I consider it as a necessary condition.
Yeah. Okay.
And Mangenji to play.
Acha, usse pehle, because my battery might go off and then I'll come back through my iPad. So I just want to finish this aspect. I think one aspect we are missing out is you won't have just a single intermediary, right? Like, there's a lot of innovation, and I think Sharan was getting to it. You can have inter-se competition amongst different kinds of intermediaries. Like, it's a, like, of course, sure, your like big oligarchs, they might try to vertically integrate even along the intermediary value chain, but there are still various different stages, right? There will be different people responsible of, say, information systems, different people responsible of your like cold storage, logistics. Sure. This is where there's certain interesting safeguards in this, the contract farming agreement. For example, it is always the sponsor's responsibility to even provision for the procurement.
The logistics, yes.
Like, the sponsor cannot get away with that responsibility, i.e. he cannot enter into an agreement saying, तुम मुझे यहाँ पे आके दो, नहीं तो मैं तुम्हारा सामान नहीं खरीदूंगा. Once you get into an agreement, the burden is on the sponsor to ensure that he can collect the produce from the farmer. Now, from what I'm aware, one of the roles of the Arthiyas was that they would bridge this gap, right? They would take their tractor. They can manage some part of the logistics. To that extent, I think even these agreements, they provide some sort of safeguards for that. Now, to what extent they'll ever be enforced, if they'll be enforced, that's a separate thing. But at least when we are talking about the merits or demerits, we have to impute some sort of good faith to the authorities, right? Like otherwise, there's no point talking about any laws in general if we say ki sarkar will always, or any sarkar will like always, mess things up. Last aspect before my battery goes off, on government intervention, the slightly meta aspect of this. See, there can be two sorts of government intervention broadly. There can be one which strives to create a market, right? And there can be a separate form of intervention which strives to sort of direct the market into a particular direction. Now, obviously, this is what makes, let's say, the government regulation for the teddy bear market different from government regulation for food market or healthcare market or education, right? And I want the economists to come in on this. To what extent do you think it's feasible to turn Indian agrarian economy and expose them to actual market forces? And what are the constraints on that? Yeah.
So,
Karthik is going first, then I'll.
No, I don't think I can answer that question in like 5 minutes. That question needs another debate in itself. So I'm going to put that on hold for now. What I'm going to say is that we are an over-legislated and an under-implemented country.
Absolutely.
And now we are an over-policyized, under-implemented country. Startup India, Digital India, Smart India. A couple of points I'll aggregate from what Karan and Sharan were saying. I think Karan also mentioned briefly what I'm going to say. The thing is, when we think of the farmer, and Ajay, even when you are saying theoretically, it sounds very good now that, there's agency, a very good word. It's beautiful when it sounds, it's got a good ring to it. Even something like digitization, these are all excellent concepts. I'm not doubting the intent, right? You are thinking, and when you said the farmer, they'll have to do a little more work. I really think they're already doing a lot of work. You said that, when they have to come together as a collective, they have to ensure that the contracts are framed fairly.
no,
They have to
I'm
put
saying
in a little more effort.
and all are there.
So the thing is that
That's what you said.
those structures, if those structures had to fructify, they could have fructified even by now. There was nothing stopping farmers from coming together. But the fact is that if they had been coming together, we wouldn't have had the dire situation that we have. There is something that is not working on the ground, which is why when we think of the farmers sort of associations, or we think of a farmer, if we look at the northern Indian belt, we're thinking of Punjabi and Haryanvi farmers. Let's move to the east a little bit. You're thinking of somebody who's in Jharkhand, who's a small crop producer, a tribal farmer, or you're thinking of somebody in Odisha who's just growing enough to feed their families, or somebody in Bengal, Chhattisgarh. So there is this disparity even within the Indian agrarian system. The legislation comes in for the entire country, right? And you are saying that, and which is why the protests are primarily happening in states which are currently gaining the most from the system, vis-a-vis those states where the system does not exist to begin with. Now, the fact remains that a lot of comments have been made that, the current APMC will remain. And I agree with that. And for now, it will remain. But let's go back 4 years. When the Geo sort of revolution came in, there was some sort of a price war that started, right? And Geo started pricing out competitors. And I think all of us bought into that story that Geo is here for good, and we'll benefit a lot from their services. And now if you go to the villages, people say that, they started jacking up prices now that we've become used to that amount of data and those free calls. Why I'm saying this is a direct analogy to what might happen in the future. Again, my point is, I am not against this law, but I am just trying to tell you that there is a lot more than meets the eye. Saying that it's the 91 moment, I think is going a bit too far. And I know Sharan did not say it, Ashok Gulati did say it, and he's some sort of a quasi-governmental sort of voice, right? So what might happen is that you assume that the private mandis come in. By the way, the private mandis can also come in right now. There was nothing stopping private mandis coming in. Private players.
State acts.
So exactly, but I mean, from what I have heard, legally, from what I have heard, there's no law stopping the farmers from selling outside the mandi. Like, be that as it may, that's the point.
No, okay. So
Yeah.
that's what I want to come in on, Karthikeya. And before I get Sharan, this, right? And my co-point here is...
No, I'm not even finished. Yeah, go on. Make your point quickly and then I want to continue on this.
No,
go
okay,
on.
fine. We'll
Yeah.
have you finish first and then I'll...
Yeah, exactly.
No, you please go on,
No,
because
please.
my point is predated on that argument. So if that argument, because my legal understanding is limited. So my sense is that if 40%, 50% farmers are already paying, selling their crops to, the private players, either under duress or because they're legally allowed, it means that parallel system is functioning de facto, if not de jure. My point is that when these private mandis come in, initially they might give you a very good deal. The prices might be really good, which might make the existing APMC structure obscure, because the Artiyas who are working there on commission basis, if they don't have adequate number of clients, that Artiya infrastructure might move from the APMC wholesale to the state mandi structure. It's like in West Bengal when the left was in power, when the TMC came to power, all the left cadre moved to the TMC. The people are the same, but it's just that their roles have changed now. They're just attached to a different organization, right? So that infrastructure might remain. But initially you give them good prices, and this is predatory pricing. You give them good prices, you basically ensure that the mandi gets phased out. And at the end of it, when the mandi gets phased out, now the argument is whether MSP will still remain or not. My point is that if the mandi does not exist, even if a notional MSP exists, how effective will that bargaining power be? Point. And so the thing is that at that point, what will you do? Do you have the legal framework? Even if you do have the legal framework, do you have the enforceability to ensure that situation does not arise? My caveat again is not against the law, but think through these nitty-gritties, these nuances before we start hailing concepts such as agency, such as saying bargaining power, collective rights. All this sounds very good, but the reality on the ground is very different from what we are shown or what we are told, which is why my biggest problem with this government especially is that the feedback mechanism is not very robust. Laws are made with the right intent, but are those laws effective in dealing with problems that exist on the ground? And I don't think that is where this is government's strongest point.
Okay. So, Karthikeya, I don't think we're in disagreement regarding most things, right? Sharan, before I get to on, a couple of pointers, right? I don't think at any point am I saying that the farmers physically have to do more work.
No, even if not physically, but just the point that. So my point is that you already pushed the farmer to the wall, है ना? Now you're saying कि चलो अब आप तुम एक collective भी बनाओ और तुम एक ensure करो that legally also you're legally also watertight. All I'm saying is, as Karan was saying, he's absolutely right, that in a country where 40% plus people are relying on agriculture as their primary occupation, you really want the onus to be on them to be able to ensure that they are legally protected. In fact, the way you're using your farmers, not just for food security, not just for strategic purposes, it should be ensured that the farmers are the party that are protected first and foremost.
And that's what the legislation
by default
is doing.
By default. So usme tumhare legal
the legislation is doing. Why
no, my point, when you said bargaining power बढ़ जाएगी, they should come together, they should have contract, they should do a little more work.
किसी context में बढ़ेगी ना सर, अगर सारे producers साथ में आएंगे किसी भी industry में. Again,
that in itself is a questionable premise.
I'm saying it's not a necessity that they have to come in together.
No, but you're right. For the current system as it exists, for them to benefit, they'll have to come together, because if 80% farmers are small landholders, then unless they come together, they can't accrue the benefits of what is going to happen. My point is that the fact that they'll come together in itself is questionable.
Sure.
Right?
Sure. Again, I'm not even on that. That is in the context of काम ज़्यादा करना पड़ेगा context. I'm not even getting to that. My point is something entirely different. What I'm trying to say here is that you have, and Sharan, you can come in on both aspects, because I would be moving a bit beyond the legislation as well.
Yeah.
And this is a discussion that I've had earlier with Karthikeya, with you, and with Karan. So I can get you on board, and maybe then we can get sort of concluding remarks. Right. Now, before I get to the context of, okay, there are too many people in agriculture and there is a need for sort of larger holdings, there's a need for sort of consolidation to make agriculture more efficient from both a sort of productive and an, let's say, an economic standpoint, to make it sort of viable for the farmer at some point. Right? So that's there. That's the second part. Before I get to that, and if you want, you can sort of stress sort of on that as well. But on this context, right, we are saying that the APMCs or people outside of the system, whosoever is sort of purchasing to ultimately end up selling at the APMC, that will now be in a contest with other private players who can directly approach the farmer to buy from them. Kartikeya is saying, and I'm not in disagreement, that there is a possibility that the same people who were buying off the market, then taking it to the mandi for the farmer, would do the same thing for the private organization. I'm not denying that there is a possibility, right? But I'm saying, what is the harm in letting that competition exist, right? I would give the benefit of the doubt to the private enterprise over someone who works through getting a license to some bureaucratic framework, right? They're there not because of any competitive forces, but because they're getting a license and have some clout in that system.
We have
Right?
two bad
The
options.
fact that you're able to
we have two bad options. We're looking for the left. No, on that specific point. On that specific point, I agree with you that
let me finish the question for Sharan, and I'll come back to you after Karan. We'll come back. What I'm saying is, there is this mechanism, right, Sharan?
Yeah.
Again, Kartikeya, again, I will come to you. I don't want this to.
That's fine. It's absolutely fine. I just wanted to make a point because in that moment it's very relevant, because then you lose sight of it. I am just saying that you have two bad options. One, wherein you have as you said, a government sort of licensed organization, which, as inefficient as it may be, exists for more of a social purpose than an economic purpose, right? And then you have the other option where you have private competition and a distorted market. Private competition, Ajay, in isolation, when you say, I think is not putting it correctly. When you are saying that there is a private force entering the market, it is not a neat private force entering a neat competitive market. It's a private force entering a distorted.
Is that mechanism established by the APMC?
It is entering a distorted market, and distortions not just because of APMC, but because of macro policies, as I said, because of several levels of distortions that exist. So just that's all I'm saying. You make that distinction very clear. That's it. So you have to choose between.
You have to choose. On that. I'm not even on
that's
that.
Fine. Yeah.
I'm not even on that. Right? I'm on a different context. That okay, you're saying that, let's say, 90% of the farmers are not able to get that MSP benefit. Right? I'm saying if they have to sell off the market, it's a perishable good. Maybe contract will be some significant part in terms of protection regarding that aspect. Right? My understanding of it is that the Price Assurance Act, that, as Karan did mention, there are significant protections for the farmer, and obviously there are for, let's say, in the Indian Contract Act generally. But Sharan, apart from the fact that there is rationalization of sort of land holdings, of sort of the kind of crops we grow, the scalability of agriculture, right, role of technology, utilities, etc. Those parts are beyond the legislation. You can certainly come in on that, because ultimately that's where the real ball game is, right? Whether we should move into, let's say, input subsidies or, let's say, direct cash payments, etc. But apart from that, the core point remains, I'm not saying the APMC is being done away with. No one is saying that, right? I'm saying if the APMC if it is that good, and I hope it is, it would be able to beat the market.
Yeah.
Now you're saying there are distortions, and I'm saying those distortions are in favor of the people operating at the APMCs. Right? If you're saying that there are winners,
I just want to interfere.
I'm saying maybe it is not the farmer, but in fact it is the people at the APMC who become the loser, whether licensed, broker, facilitator, agent, whatever. They are a loser, rather than the farmer who can get in direct touch with another private entity where this political clout, at least with reference to the government controlling it, and that political relation with that government machinery, will be relatively less. Sure, it is a structure, it is an organization, an incorporated entity will have its own hierarchy. Not denying that, boss. But I'm saying there is an alternative. And if the APMCs are genuinely that bona fide and great in comparison to another large incorporated organization or a company, I'm sure they'll prevail. If they have a better price to offer, maybe people will stay with the APMCs.
Okay.
Can I just make
Yeah.
a very small remark? So, just a sec. There's a plane passing by.
Yes.
Yeah. So one of the criticisms on this
Sharon will get you
APMC
after
versus parallel market, it's also that because you're making the private markets tax exempt, that it prices out APMCs. So that's something to keep in mind. Like that.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean that works the other way, right? That you can't really have a parity between an APMC based market system and a parallel sort of voluntary market system, also because
Yes.
you can't charge those taxes there.
Okay.
Now that's not a critique of the policy, that's just
It's
the
a feature.
effect of the policy, but that also, but it like the APMC versus private markets wouldn't necessarily be like a, you know, an apples to apples.
Yeah, it might be an apples to oranges comparison.
Yeah.
Okay. Sharon, we get you.
Yeah.
And then Kartikeji, short point as a conclusion. Then we'll take one question that we have from our very own Sandeep Bhaiya, who's asked a pertinent question. But Sharon, we'll get you in on.
Okay. Lot of things that you've touched upon. I think the first point is, in the history of economics over the years, the way development has worked, we can't identify one single policy ever in history which does not create its own distortions. There will always be winners and losers. Holding an economic policy dagger on the top of the heads of almost 50% of the labor force in the country to say that, okay, amongst you, there will be winners and losers, and hence I'm not going to introduce a policy, is something of a very naive argument to be making. There will be winners and losers. Even in any trade policy, import substitution, export promotion, there are always winners and losers. And we'll have to establish that. The role of good policy here is to make sure that there are, if we are moving from status quo to policy A, then the winners from status quo get a little increased under policy A. So if there are 10% winners under status quo, it moves to 12% or 15%. It can come with its own distortions. And I completely agree that there is no economic policy which can get rid of distortions unless you somehow magically create perfect competition. And that's never going to happen. Right?
And then no one makes money.
Exactly. And then no one's going to make
perfect competition.
Exactly. No one's going to make money.
Then everyone's marginal.
Exactly. The second point that I want to talk about is the fact that if we are saying that states have so much power as to make sure that an entire state area can be an APMC, I'm pretty sure and I'm not a legal luminary, but I'm pretty sure states also have enough power to have state-based reforms instituted inside their APMC acts as well. If you have enough power to make sure that an entire state can be designated as a state-mandated APMC, I'm pretty sure you have enough power to bring about neater reforms to make sure that APMCs don't go away. That's a political economy question. If I'm saying that APMCs are bad, if I'm saying that to quote Yogendra Yadav, if I'm saying that APMCs are like a leaking shed, it makes no policy sense to me to say that, okay, I'm going to extend the leaking shed to the entire state, and I'm not going to allow private players to come in. So if you have enough power and that's a political economy question, but if you have enough power, you can also go around other ways to make sure that the APMC system can be robust on a state-to-state level. The third point that I want to talk about is with regards to the Arthiyas who exist in APMCs and who can move outside of APMCs into private markets. The point is over here to create and unlock a system. And this is from what my understanding of the act is. It is to unlock a system where you have an incentivization system in place for private players to move in to direct contact at an interstate level also with the farmer. It does not address issues of agency in a lot of ways. Why? Because of the fact that at the farm level, agency is not just based on land holdings. It is also based on things like competition. It is based on caste. It is based on a lot of other things. So even if there is collaboration, there can be a lot of distortions even within those collaborations, where you can see dominant castes coming in and taking over a lot of these conversations of bargaining power that may happen inside certain districts and states. So agency is something that will be built on over a medium or a long term. It's not going to happen in 2 years. It's not going to happen in 3 years. It's not, and it's very stupid of us to even expect that there is magically going to be agency at the level of the farmer. Exactly. And the final point that I want to address, I think, is what Karan mentioned: market creation versus market direction. Market direction depends now on what the states do with regards to these APMCs. The market creation or the unlocking of the markets for a lot of the farmers has been already done by the government through these acts. The problem that has existed so far is that different states have had, say, for instance, Bihar. Bihar did away with APMC. Maharashtra did away with APMC. But a lot of other states also had APMC laws that were existing at different points of time. And this goes back to the point of harmonization. A Bihar farmer without an APMC, if he's not getting the correct price, still can't go into West Bengal and sell his produce because
now we can, right?
Exactly. So because of the problem of interstate commerce that is existing, we cannot say that we are a country which is fiscally united, but we can say that we are and this was the exact argument that the government propped up with GST. I'm not going into the government's track record. The government's track record is a political economy question, and I think we can have a separate parallel debate on that. But the fact that 70 years since independence, and I think this is exactly what we need to talk about. If you're saying that 50% of your labor force is under agriculture, and you've had only select states in the country getting rid of APMC laws, you've had almost 35 to 40% of your labor force under agriculture be subject to monopolistic markets in the presence of so many other distortions where they cannot sell outside their state in a lot of cases, right? Where the state is creating a system where you can't go out and sell or make your own produce in a remunerative way. That is a problem. That is a major distortion that needs to be spoken about and needs to be addressed. Whether MSP is an executive policy or not, no one really had a problem with MSPs in terms of executive policy. No one really spoke about the fact that MSPs should be statutory just before the introduction of the bill. In the history, in the history of Indian agriculture, I have not seen a single political party say that, okay, we are going to make sure that MSPs are legally mandated by the parliament. No one said that. Yeah. People argue what the quantum of the MSP or the magnitude of the MSP should be. And that is a debate that can still happen. The point about market direction and market creation needs to coexist in the case that what role do the governments take in the case of an MSP? Is it going to be a price indicator? Is it going to be a case where I am creating a parallel market where the farmer has an option? The center sets the APMC, and other states now. Center sets the MSP, and other states now, with the APMC structure that they have, go out and buy at these MSPs. The debate then needs to happen at the center and the state level that, okay, your MSP is not enough. Are you following the Swaminathan Commission or not? These are debates and distortions that need to happen at the level of the center in the state.
And but the present reforms aren't doing anything to sort of affect that adversely.
Exactly. So this is again a question of political economy and cleaner reforms. But the point is, if you're even allowing 1 to 2% additional farmers to now benefit from private contract farming, that's a short term, or even in a span of 1 to 2 years. Yes, in a span of 1 to 2 years, a win for the policy, because you are still there might be deadweight laws, but if you're increasing the number of winners in a political front on a political economic front, that's still a win for the policy. And that's exactly what you need to address, because we're a developing country. Agriculture is not as remunerative in India as in a lot of other cases. There are still export bans. There are still a lot of policies that need to be introduced at a structural level to make sure that the Indian farmer is competitive with global prices and the global farmer. We just can't insulate the Indian farmer and say that yes.
I'm going to ask you to.
Okay, yeah, just a last point.
We get Karthik.
Yes. We cannot insulate the Indian farmer from the market forces and say, okay, it is a life. You need to ask the Indian farmer, if given a choice, would I allow my children to do the exact same thing at the exact same level of income or under the exact same conditions that I am undergoing or I am sowing my crops? In most cases, the answer is going to be no, because livelihoods in India need to now have much more important weightage than lives, and you need to still consider these distortions when you're making policies in agriculture.
Okay, Karthik, short sort of concluding remarks before we take in the. You can maybe respond to Sharan or the earlier points that we were at, but short.
No, I don't even have to respond to Sharan because he's not contradicting what I'm saying in any meaningful way.
Sure.
We might have slight digressions, but I don't think that's sort of in any way meaningful to the debate. Listen, having said all of what I've said, I must say, no, I know.
Yeah.
I'm not against the policy. What I'm against is the way it's being marketed. The thing is, and making it very short, and you keep on saying private market, and competition, things gonna be fine, great. A government can have two roles in a market. So I will not use the words that Karan and Sharan mentioned. I would use either a government can facilitate a market or it can intervene in a market. So far it was intervening. It did not do a great job. So APMC is not a great model. So what you were saying, if APMC is so good, it's not. Let's not even hypothetically assume it's great. My point is, if the government's not been intervening efficiently, I'm not sure that it will be able to facilitate private players' entry into the system efficiently either. Which is why I feel that the way this policy is being marketed will not eventually fructify. I mean, I really hope it does. But you see where I'm coming from. I'm saying that government can intervene or facilitate. It's not a good job of intervening, but I don't even see this government doing a very good job of facilitating a private market in this domain.
Okay. By government, you mean any government?
Any government, just the state in general, with its institutions. Yeah.
Again, clarifications are necessary. So now, before I get Kern on in for his concluding remarks, Kishika, we can get Mr. Sandeep Rathi's question on board, and maybe some of you can. So I'm guessing all of you can read this question, but for everyone's benefit, I'll repeat it. I support the bill, but my question is, अगर कोई company किसी भी product vegetables को stock कर लेती है, तो as a consumer मुझे तो वो product costly ही मिलेगा. Farmers और company दोनों का फायदा, but क्या इससे महंगाई बढ़ेगी? Before anyone else, before I get Kern in, I want Karthik to comment on this.
No, I think this question is a little sort of less relevant to today's debate, because today we were discussing one of the three. Yeah.
No, but we've had this discussion quite a few times.
Yeah. So the
producer versus consumer dichotomy ultimately becomes, as Sharan
no,
said,
I think his question is more about hoarding. And I think
it's more on the essential commodities, and
he's talking about the Essential Commodity Act, jahan pe the limit has been removed. So can that pave way for illegal hoarding?
So
and again,
legal question, Karthik, I'll get you on board. So on the legal, Kern, do you want to clarify the Essential Commodities Act and the amendment with respect to this in terms of the restrictions that have been lifted, or should I come in on that?
Okay. I didn't get into the that specific amendment because I was under the impression that we won't be discussing that extensively today. But the very gist of it is, you're basically changed certain provisions relating to hoarding, right? So in Essential Commodities Act, there were various stock caps for, or basically hoarding prevention sort of laws, and from what I understand, they have been tinkered with.
Okay.
I can
so,
check it up right now, but
I
don't know we have the time to do that.
कि दो चीजें हैं. पहला तो है question of perishable goods, right? मतलब vegetables का अगर specific बात हो रही है, और mostly foodstuffs are perishable goods, right? तो storage भी एक थोड़े period के लिए होगी, और उसके बाद inventory stock को clear करना पड़ेगा. तो होर्डिंग श्योर एक रिस्ट्रिक्शन हटाया गया है कुछ कमोडिटीज पे जिनको एसेंशियल कमोडिटी शेड्यूल में डाला गया था और अमेंडमेंट से मोस्ट रिस्ट्रिक्शंस को हटाया गया है मगर अगर प्राइसेस एक थ्रेशोल्ड आई थिंक 50% इज द नंबर राइट इफ आई एम नॉट मिस्टेकन
I that's what I think I read.
Yes, I think 50% है नंबर within a specific duration. अगर एक साल या 12 महीने या एवरेज ऑफ 3 साल अगर इस पीरियड में 50% से बहुत तेजी से 50% जैसे अगर प्राइस बढ़ जाता है या वो थ्रेशोल्ड चेंज कर सकती है सरकार तो उस टाइम पर सरकार इंटरवीन कर सकती है सरकार अंदर आ सकती है उस प्राइस को कैप करने के लिए तो संदीप भाई ये आपके लिए स्पेसिफिक पॉइंट था
ये एक और चीज है कि मेरे को देखो हम ना ये बात भूल जाते हैं कि इंडियन एग्रीकल्चर प्रोडक्टिविटी जो है वो बहुत बढ़ चुकी है right now we are not an undersupplied market, we're an oversupplied market.
We are oversupplied, yeah, exactly. So exactly this
संदीप भाई अगर आज रिलायंस अपने गोदाम भर भी लेता है ना आपको सब्जी लगभग उतने दाम पर ही मिलेगी कोई टेंशन की बात नहीं है और उसका देखिए इसमें मैं मखौल बना रहा हूँ लेकिन सच्चाई ये है कि हम लोग अब इस समय मैंने ये बात शायद 1.5 साल पहले भी बोली थी मैं आज फिर बोलूंगा जो विडंबना है ना भारतीय किसान की वो ये है जिस साल सूखा पड़ता है उस साल भी वो रोता है और जिस साल बम्पर क्रॉप होती है उस साल भी वो रोता है और इसमें ना ये शरण ने जो बोला था कि जो लोग वापस गए हैं वो खेती में लगेंगे तो और पैदावार होगी इससे पहले ही हो चुकी है उनके जाने से पहले ही ज्यादा पैदावार हो रही है ऑलरेडी और अब वो जाएंगे तो खैर और थोड़ा बहुत जो बढ़ेगा 2017 में आपको मंदसौर के वो प्रोटेस्ट याद है आपको याद है कि लोग दूध सड़क पर अपने गिरा कर आए थे आपको याद है लोगों ने टमाटर सड़कों पे हाईवे पर छोड़े थे क्योंकि उनके पास स्टोरेज कॉस्ट के पैसे नहीं थे और जो मार्केट में दाम मिल रहा था 2 रुपए 3 रुपए क्योंकि ऐसी डिफ्लेशन है मार्केट में वी आर एन ओवर सप्लाइड एग्रीकल्चर मार्केट राइट नाउ अब इसमें हमें अगर आप शुरू करूं इसका कारण क्या है तो बहुत लंबी गंगा जमुना बह जाएगी
ठीक है तो हम उसमें पढ़ सकते हैं बहुत और भी प्रश्न आ रहे हैं
आज नहीं कभी और सही लेकिन ये एक बहुत बड़ा मुद्दा है कि हम लोग भूल जाते हैं कि कृषि का जो संकट है वो इस समय कम उत्पादन का नहीं ज्यादा उत्पादन का है
बट
और फिर आप एक्सपोर्ट बैन लगा देते हो
Also just want to chime in on that we also have this weird thing where we are oversupplied but our productivity numbers are really poor
and that is primarily because that is primarily current because there is not in the agricultural sector we have something called underemployment where too many people are doing a limited amount of work which is why the productivity
disguised unemployment
which is why because so the denominator is so high that the numerator looks small in front of it.
Exactly, and
I'm also talking about just general yield of separate crops. So I think the Swaminathan Commission, their report. Just a second. Yeah, so Swaminathan Commission report has yields which are like I think it's in kilograms per hectare, and they have compared us to Vietnam, Indonesia, bunch of other like Nordic countries, etc. And
I think there would be a lot of interstate heterogeneity there. I think the northern states would do better than say the eastern states, for instance. So I on average, you can say you're absolutely right. Yeah.
So I'll just intervene over here because it's very important we remember that during COVID there was a lot of news going on that there was an undersupply of food grains in the country, especially in rural India, and there were grains rotting in the FCI warehouses across the country. So the problem with inflation is not just a problem of price volatility, it is also about whether there are adequate distribution mechanisms, because the government under current circumstances can just buy the produce from the farmers, but then in the case of perishable goods or otherwise, if the distribution mechanism, again, that's a major distortion. We haven't spoken about that, but that's a major distortion. If the distribution mechanism is not enough, then
I don't think the government procures perishable goods, and the government primarily procures grain.
No, I'm just talking about the overall distribution mechanism. Yeah. Exactly. If the overall distribution mechanism is not good enough, then the question of price volatility again will come in and affect both parties, the farmer and the consumer, in two completely opposite ways.
Sure. What do you guys think about?
So I think that draws our discussion to a close. Many thanks to all our panelists and everyone in the audience for joining us. सभी का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद. And everyone who's been asking a lot of other questions as well. We're already crossing an hour and a half, but I'm sure that we can once again, please do write to us if you are interested in us taking this topic forward, and we can continue this discussion on other specific points. जैसे कि बत्रा जी ने कहा, मैं 1 घंटे तक 2 घंटे तक गंगा जमुना बह जाएगी और उसमें हम चल पड़ेंगे. But I hope that our audience here enjoyed the fact, because we're getting in some comments, some people wanted us to continue in English, and
which is why I switched to English. I switched to English midway,
yes,
if you noticed. That was the
but
reason
at
I
the
did
same
that.
time, we've been receiving feedback over the years that people have wanted us to sort of have a bilingual or podcast or some discussion in Hindi. We did try it once with some quotations from Atalji when he passed away a few years back. But I think, having said that, I think this is just a small initiative from our side to sort of start a conversation, right? This is not conclusive in any manner. There's a lot that we still have not gotten to, right?
No, as Sharan was saying, no policy is conclusive ever.
Exactly. There's no
You
definite
cannot ever
policy
have
in
a
the history of-
conclusive policy.
in the history of the world.
Yeah.
I think wants to come in.
There are all those people you have to employ, man. All the lawyers, policy analysts, bureaucrats. This were like physical sciences. I think that would have a very bad effect on employment figures.
Again, on that note, I think the end point is not something, the final conclusion of the objective is still something that none of us are in disagreement with, right? Everyone.
No, I must add something that I think what we're trying to also do is cut a lot of the clutter that exists, because I don't think the media is focusing a lot of attention on the difficult questions facing these policies.
Exactly.
The window shopping has been brilliant, because the mannequins have been set up, the clothes have been set on the mannequins very beautifully. That's excellent, I think. When you enter the store and you actually see what's there, what the quality of the material, that's a very different thing. So I think what you are doing here is excellent, because we're getting into, and I guess, with our limited domain expertise, at least with mine, we're at least trying to critically evaluate the pros and cons. I mean, I don't think any of us here was either completely for or completely against the policy. And I think that is the beauty of debate, right? And so thank you for organizing this.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Karthik. And as I was saying on this sort of concluding note, that the broader goal or the objective of the policy is not something that anyone is in disagreement with. Right? The idea is that the farmer gets a better price, has a better livelihood. Now, we've had multiple discussions as to we need people to go out of farming into different livelihoods, as to borrow from Sharan and borrow from earlier discussions with both of you. That ultimately, the idea is whosoever is farming now is comfortable in that livelihood, and we can create more options for people in the services and in the secondary industry sector. Right? That still must remain the goal.
So just a fact, a large number of farmers are actually not drawing a majority of their income from agriculture anymore.
Yeah.
Just a fact. They are doing it from allied activities. Anyway, so I guess
know this, but I'm actually a Grameen. My dad.
I think the figure is around 40% from farm income and 60% from allied activities.
Something like that, yeah.
On an average household.
Again, allied activities is another interesting legal and economic question.
Yeah.
Which, whether taxation we get into, whether we get into land use, that's another question, and another very pertinent question, if I may, for both angles, legal and economic. And if you are interested in us sort of exploring those or related areas, please feel free to write to us. We'll continue to bring in conversations that bring in both the law and the economics of policies, agriculture and otherwise, because we continue to sort of focus on our objective that neither law nor economics must be read in a vacuum, and both must be read together. I'm going to end on this quotation by Mr. Karthik Batra, कि अजय तुम्हारे पॉडकास्ट पर तो बहुत तैयारी करके आनी पड़ती है, तुम्हारे यहाँ वकीलों को भी बड़ी खतरनाक इकोनॉमिक्स आती है. I think that's the sort of broader goal. That's our intention, and if we've been successful in doing that, I think we're moving in the right direction. Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you, Karan. Thank you, Sharan. Thank you, Karthik, and thank you, our wonderful audience for continuing to join us once again.
Thank you, Ajay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Ajay. Thank you.
I've
Thank
been
you.
told by my team that I must say this at least once before we end. Please like, share, subscribe, and press the bell icon for whatever it is worth. We're still a non-profit, and we hope to continue to remain one. And we hope that we can sort of spread the message far and wide. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
All right.
Please take care of yourselves.
Good night.
Goodbye.